Oh, I got plenty of memory. Okay, we're ready.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
All right. Hello, I'm Tommy Merritt. I'm from Kilgore, Texas, born and raised in Kilgore, went to Kilgore College, Texas Christian University. I've worked in the family business since I was 12 years old. I know how to make a payroll. I know how to interview and hire and run a business, pay taxes. I'm running for the Texas Ag Commissioner because I believe that I'm the most qualified for the job. I feel like that my experience of planting pine trees as a young child, thinning them, harvesting them, eventually selling them as poles and lumber is a very great experience of growing up. I learned how to weld when I was 12, and I had my first group of cows when I was 16. We have a ranch in Estaline, Texas. If you've never been through Estaline, I warn you to slow down. It is a speed trap on Highway 287 up by Childress. We run a cow-calf operation. We sell deer hunts, we sell quail hunts, we sell alfalfa hay, and we do that in order to make a living and keep our kids working and to earn enough money to pay our taxes. The job as Ag Commissioner deserves a lot of experience. I've got 14 years experience in the Texas House. I was chairman of 2 committees. Was appointed by Governor Clements to serve on the Sabine River Authority for 6 years. The Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. I was the vice president of the Texas Independent Producers Royalty Owners Association. I'm endorsed in this particular race by the Texas Department of Public Safety Troopers Organization, and I think that's very critical when we talk about border security, working with local sheriffs and local law enforcement. I'm a former United States Postal Inspector, and so I have law enforcement experience and endorsed by them. I think our border and border security is critical. I believe working on the future water projects for Texas is very critical. I served on the Sabine River Authority, and we talked about building a pipeline from Toledo Bend to Houston. I believe that we ought to look at conserving water before we go out and try to build lakes. I think that we have to conserve water on our toilets, conserve water in our yards, and we have to ensure that the farmers and ranchers have adequate water to raise the crops and raise the animals to supply our food for the future. I believe that we should educate our children. I think that technical vocational education combined with working a job, particularly farming and ranching, that the future for a young person is learning how to raise food and raise animals and grow up to be a taxpayer. That's the #1 job for our public education, is to just create a taxpayer. And how you do that is provide them an opportunity and explain to them what the future of Texas holds. And in my opinion, it's with farming and ranching and learning how to have a skill. And in just lieu of a technical vocational, I think we have to throw in an agriculture angle for that, and that a child understands that they can go out into the rural parts of the state and help the rest of us enjoy a healthy living. My mother is very proud of me. She's 96, and she wanted me to come down and present our family. I have strong family values. My father competed against Howard Hughes. We had Merritt tool that he started in 1928, and we became Boeing's largest supplier on the Osprey helicopter by building very complicated machine parts. I've run a business for 36 years that sometimes we would employ over 1,000, so I know how to make a payroll. I have employees that work for me for over 30 years. Some of them have worked for the family for maybe over 40 when my father was living. So I would just like to say to each and every one of you, I'm happy to be here at this table and to present your next Texas Agriculture Commissioner. I'm applying for the job. I feel like I have the best qualifications for that. And so thank y'all and good evening.
Thank you.
James, you want to start?
Sure. Talking about the water conservation, because here locally, we went through an exercise with the San Jacinto River Authority and to understand what they were doing, because they've acquired $500 million of local debt in order to put in pipelines to take the Lake Conroe down to the South County. So my question is, from what we're told or hear, and I don't know if it's accurate because I'm not an engineer and haven't gone through the numbers, statewide, because let me backtrack. Of course, statewide, this last legislature put up Prop 6, and that was $2 billion out of the rainy day fund, the oil and gas tax revenue, basically just to secure loans. That they're going to try to make it into something that would be used for rural areas in order to get funding. Now, when we talked to Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst about it, who was a big proponent for that, it was really his bailiwick, so to speak. We mentioned, well, locally we had to go out and get bonds. Why can't they? And he said, well, they don't have a valuation base. Well, I think the problem there is, of course, they don't have a valuation base in order to raise their revenues. Are we as a state going to have to fork over 53 some odd billion dollars to deal with a very serious drought issue? We don't deny there's a drought problem, and it's something we need to take care of as a state. But how do we do that without basically sucking the money out of the parts of the state that are taking care of the water problems themselves?
Well, first of all, to answer this question in 2 minutes will be very difficult.
That's
So
fine.
maybe I'll have a follow-up, but
That's fine.
The Children's Texas had an issue that they were going to have to spend $5 million to rid themselves of the effluent, to treat the effluent.
Mm-hmm.
It was cheaper for them to build a golf course and to spray the effluent on the golf course. And so they saved the money.
Well,
They came up with an innovative way to do that.
Right.
Now, for them to do that, they probably had to make a presentation to their water district.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening is all the projects are being submitted to the water board.
Development board,
They're going to decide and prioritize what I would say, similar to highways, what is shovel ready. And a lot of these communities have been waiting for years and years and years for some form of help, and hopefully that their different water districts will prioritize what's important. And then the water board's going to decide whether it's going to be South Houston or whether it will be Childress who has the best project for either conservation or they're in a drought, like it's an emergency in Childress. They've been out there for 2 years, their lake's been drying up. They have to have something,
Well, how much money are we talking about there? Is it just that $8 billion and then they run dry, or how do they finance it?
I think that all the projects are gonna have to have a return on the investment. It's just not gonna, like when I was on
That'll
the
make it
committee-
take a really long time, though, won't it? 'Cause you
Well,
have to
sure,
wait
over time, but it's easier, like on the Sabine River Authority,
Uh-huh.
for Kilgore, they put together a whole project for Kilgore to have surface water instead of well water.
Right.
So, but Kilgore didn't have the engineering experience. They could have had to go out and had all these problems. They go to the Sabine River Authority, they had built projects, so they fronted the project, rolled it all up into a finance package, and Kilgore agreed to pay $11,000 a month for the development of that. So you would take what your water sales would be over the term of the loan, and somebody is going to bank that. As you well know, right now the economy, the prime rate is maybe 2% or 3%.
Yeah.
So do you actually need to go out and help someone get a low rate loan?
Yeah, that's true too. You're right.
But if you had a 3% tax-free loan, that may equate to a 6% simple interest rate.
True.
And so it's about what is innovation, how do you move there? But the city of Kilgore doesn't have that capability or the experience. Now,
That's a common issue, you think, probably? At
I
least
think
in
it
the
is
rural
a common,
areas?
sure, it is a common issue. And I think it's, you know, when you go to the legislature and you have a community like the size of Dallas,
Right.
they have a huge chamber, they have a lot more resources as on their committees and boards.
Sure.
And a lot of communities, the whole community by county is driven by the school district.
Yeah.
They're the largest employer, you know, and they have a hard time feeling, well, who's gonna be on their appraisal board versus, you know, who's gonna be the county commissioner. But most all of them, the income is based off of the school district or the county. So,
Thank you. I'll,
thank you.
sure. Dale?
Okay, one of our questions had to do with disaster relief and so forth. Please discuss the proper working relationship between TDA and FEMA. And your comment was with the DPS, and I guess so it still left me with a question of what is the proper working relationship between the Agriculture Commission and FEMA with respect to disaster relief efforts?
Well, you know, that's close to my heart, that question. Joe Albaugh was the director of FEMA. I was the first elected official on the job for the recovery of the Space Shuttle Columbia. There was not a coordinated effort with the state and the feds on all agencies. So as a result of that, DPS been given the task to have man the center, and it's an unbelievable center. And the DPS had a young man. He was a director named Jack Colley who established it, and Jack Colley would call all the players in on a conference call with the lieutenant governor. I was a chairman of the public safety committee and on the committee. And we would sit and Jack Colley would say, how many gallons of fuel do we have? Let's call the National Guard. Let's move it to this place. But it was all coordinated by DPS. When we first went to Lufkin, you had individual agencies trying to work with individual tasks, and we had to get all that coordinated. And who coordinates it now is DPS. There's actually a director for that. And so versus the Department of Agriculture dealing direct with FEMA, the DPS, I would go to the director of the command center and say, I've got a request from a farmer or a rancher, or we need to transfer water. Then he coordinates that. You just don't need a lot of chickens running around with their heads cut off. And
So
that's the purpose.
FEMA has full recognition of the DPS role in that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And they're fine with that?
Yes, sir. Yep. And as a matter of fact, it basically was set up for that reason. And the surprise to me is that the first person on site in Lufkin is the Forestry Service. The Forestry Service coordinates the whole operation for setting it up. And you would think, well, how does that work? Well, the Forestry Service is under Texas A&M. They're not under the Texas Department of Agriculture. So there is a link missing there. But the Forestry Service they'll get a request for 1,000 emergency fire responders to go to North Dakota or Iowa or Idaho, wherever there's a major fire. So they buy 3,000 airline tickets and coordinate all the food, all the shelter with the American Red Cross. And so they do that for fires, so they're the best to when you walk in. When I walked into the Lufkin Center, the Forestry Service is there, and they're unloading their trailer with all the fax machines, all the telephones, all the equipment, and so they've evolved to that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Reading about your idea to run a pipeline from Toledo Bend Reservoir, where would that go, and how much water is it pump, and how big would it be? And given the fact that every time you got a flood, you got drought somewhere, is that a project that could crisscross the whole state or maybe the whole nation?
No, sir. No, sir, the pipeline from Toledo Bend, that reservoir, is, I think, the largest in the state. There's not a demand for the water. So the demand for the water, if you use gravity flow, could be canals into Houston. Just like what you've done, from the San Jacinto River Authority. So the San Jacinto River Authority, they could go further south gravity. And so if you need more water, then the citizens of Houston, or down at the end of the road, would decide whether they want to pay for that $500 million to transfer it. I believe that to go out and use reclamation when you have to use 2 acres to 3 acres for every 1 acre that you use to build a lake, that will be light years trying to build reservoirs, and right now we would be fighting the Obama administration left and right over trying to get a permit for a lake. So the pipelining of that would be simpler. So it's the end user has to decide what is the quickest, the fastest, and so does the city of Dallas and Fort Worth, who, they don't have a reservoir north of them. They have Oklahoma, that they're trying to work with, but they would have to decide, do we want to put in the pump stations? And we would pump it back up, but they're capturing it in Toledo Bend. So it would be, I think it's gonna be the Metroplex or the, what I would call the I-10 or I-35 corridors would be the best place to use that Toledo Bend water. But I do think that it would be a faster use of the current property that's sitting there.
How big are those pipes that they're running?
To me, that's the end user. It depends on what volume of water you would want to have. There's a power plant that's run I think a 24-inch line from Toledo Bend south of Henderson to run the power plant because it was cheaper for them to run a 24-inch for the volume to fill up their retainage fund. The city of Kilgore on their retainage pond, they put a weir in the Sabine River and ran it about 8 or 10 miles. And what they do, they fill up that pond, and it's 3 days of surface water. So they built a pond. They could have built a pond that would last them 10 days, but it was just based on how much money, the return on how much water they could sell to their citizens. Look, water sales for these communities is a huge revenue. This is not just a service. I mean, they're running water departments and they're running other things off of water sales. My house in Longview, I put in a separate meter because the sprinkler system is cheaper to pay for that water than it is for the water that they're saying you're using for your toilets.
Off the same pipeline? Or is it
No,
parallel?
just in the community.
Okay.
They have not built the pipeline. I'm just saying that the water sales, in my opinion, communities like for you to water your yard because it's a water sale. There's not something that says we want to conserve water. If they can sell the water, they want you to water. What I'm simply saying is, hold on, don't just water for the sake of the revenue.
Right.
You need to have a system there of conservation when it's good. It's all about when things are good. It's when you need to be having your conservation program started.
Yeah.
Like the rainy
Too
day
late.
fund.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
For when you need it.
Just think how big those pipes are. They're going from Lake Conroe to the Woodlands.
You can see them on research. They're
Yeah, they're a lot. They're like probably
They're
40
4 foot.
We see
Yeah.
they look like 40 inches.
They look like 40
They're
inches.
40
And they're not going into a reservoir.
Right. And that 40 inches of they have calculated the population growth,
Oh yeah, they did. Yeah.
and for that water sale.
Right.
But the lake they're draining from is already 4 foot low.
That is a huge lake.
Yeah.
I bet they suck it down.
It looks
What,
full on me. Right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
The guest worker program.
Yes, that's a good
Between
one.
that and the illegals that are here, how do you feel about the guest worker program?
Well, particularly from the agricultural concern, because they need migrant workers.
Right.
So how do we handle that and deal with the illegal issue and the cost?
Right. First of all, I believe we have to have a secure border. And I think that we have to keep pushing on the Obama administration or any administration to secure the border. And once you secure the border, then we have to have a program that secures our state and our nation, that we don't put an undue burden on our citizens by someone that stays here. You know, that we want to make sure that if you want to come work here, we want to have a system that you come work and that you have to go back to wherever your home is.
Right.
So the establishment of a guest worker program it sounds easy. I think it's a lot more difficult than people make it out to be.
Sure.
I was a supporter on the chairman of the I'm like Rick Perry of the committee of Homeland Security. That we pushed a bill to require that DPS certify citizenship on a driver's license. So when you want to have someone that comes here, if they're not a citizen, they can't get a driver's license.
Right.
So if they're a guest worker, they can't come here as a guest, go down and get a driver's license, and then drive over to Louisiana or Oklahoma.
Well, isn't that already the law?
Pardon me?
Isn't that already the law in Texas?
About the citizenship on a driver's license?
They can't get a
Well,
driver's license.
that just became law.
Yeah, it was just passed, right?
That's right. But we passed it out of the committee. But because I'm an employer and I get hammered about, well, are you working illegal aliens? I want to make sure that as an employer, I'm not penalized. And I had an employee that transposed a social security number.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And that person was a citizen and could have sued me. You know, and there's a big toss-up for that. But now that Texas is requiring a citizenship, you know, for a driver's license, then hopefully Louisiana has that. And maybe, you know, so you push those things for a guest worker, that they can't just come in and have the free services of that. So I think you've got to have a real strong system in place to make sure that people will return back to wherever they're from.
Right.
You indicate that you're in some sort of agricultural business, in the tree business and so forth and so on. How would, being the agriculture commissioner, would there be any conflict of interest in that?
The Constitution requires you to be in the business to be the agriculture commissioner. So you have to have experience to be in agriculture to be the commissioner.
But what
So I
steps?
do not believe that there's a conflict with being in the business and still being agriculture commissioner. One of your questions deals with the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Agriculture has, I think, about 750 employees, and 85% of their budget is administering federal grants.
Right.
You know, when you ask about mad cow disease, the Department of Agriculture doesn't deal with mad cow. You know, the Animal Health Commission. When you want to have a quail study, we're doing a quail study right now. That's being done by Texas A&M, not the Department of Agriculture. You know, we're going to have an agriculture commissioner that says, wait a second, we need to coordinate, we need to have our hands on everything that we're dealing with in Texas that deals with the product of food and beef and chickens, and you know, so I do not believe there's a conflict. If you call me about mad cow, I would say, well, you need to call the Department of Animal Health, and you're going to say, well, wait a minute, you're the commissioner. Well,
One quick thing, I read somewhere that the Department of Agriculture that is over cell phones and internet service.
what you said, broadband.
Broadband.
Governor Perry requested for the Department of Agriculture to coordinate that with the feds. And I've been involved, I was on a committee that dealt with broadband, and there's an area that, for rolling out broadband, there had to be coordination for the rural parts, and someone had to be responsible for that. And so that was given to the Department of Agriculture to coordinate that piece of the puzzle. My hometown of Kilgore, we have Verizon inside the city, and AT&T is surrounding us. Everyone around Kilgore has high-speed internet, but Verizon hadn't chosen to build any kind of a high-speed internet inside the city limits. And because it's a monopoly for them.
Right.
The Department of Agriculture, in my opinion, ought to be right on top of that to try to help work that out with the lieutenant governor or the governor to be the spokesman that the children aren't getting the same education that your children are getting. We have to, the whole idea is to get the kids all on the internet where part of their education and that information sharing is given to everybody.
Okay, great.
Do we have a commissioner of animal health?
No, sir.
Who runs that program?
That's a bureaucracy.
What do they fall under?
I think they're their own,
Directly under the governor, I guess.
I guess.
James?
I'm working on all that.
Another group.
I think this time what I'll ask about is the children's food program under the Department of Agriculture, primarily with schools, correctly? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, of course, as someone very interested, I want good government and I want limited government. I don't want them being intrusive where they don't need to be. Well, I had a conversation released that reminded me of a very absurd rule that came out of the Department of Agriculture, and I think it's generally called the cupcake rule. Have you heard of that?
That was I think under Susan Combs as a
Yeah,
commissioner.
exactly, but it's still there. And because when we first heard it, we thought it was an insane federal rule. Found out, no, it's not. And here it is for my daughter's birthday party at school, my now 11-year-old daughter. This is like 3 years ago. We had to worry about, whether it was going to be all these rules about cupcakes or not, dealing with food nutrition. So my question is, as the commissioner for the Department of Agriculture, are you going to continue to broach into our parental responsibilities and how we feed our own children, or what will you be doing about
The
that?
answer to that would be no.
Will you promise to get rid of the cupcake rule?
I'll eat my own cupcake, but I think I ought to have the choice to do that. And that is getting into what the family feels like. Now, there's another question about the 3 E's. That's something that's voluntary that I think that we ought to be going into the schools as a commissioner, or you as your people, and you ought to be teaching your kids about what's nutrition,
Sure.
what's good and bad. But I think that I don't believe that government can ensure whether a child is eating a cupcake out of their backpack or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm with you on that. I just
Okay.
believe that we ought to be minding our own business and not have strings attached to our rules.
Yeah, exactly.
If the federal government wants to give us a grant, fine. I'm not going to take it if there's strings attached. And so it should roll. It should
I
roll
totally
into your
agree.
school system.
Mhm.
As far as me going in and speaking to a school board meeting or teachers meeting and say, listen, we want y'all to really talk to these kids about the 3 E's.
Sure.
And
Education is fine,
sure.
but rules
You
like
can talk
that.
to me. You can talk to me about jogging. It doesn't mean I'm going to jog.
Well, back when we were in school education, in PE, you were required to take health
Yeah, and
one semester.
nutrition.
And that stuff was covered there.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't really set into well, because apparently I don't do all of them anyway, so.
Look at the crap we eat.
Good,
Yeah.
Dale.
Okay, you kind of added a freelance answer at the bottom of the questionnaire. I believe Texas must have appraisal reformation, or I guess
Reform.
Of course, appraisals relate back to property taxes and as a taxation form. So could you discuss, first of all, what you specifically have in mind for appraisal reform, and then how that relates to taxation in general and property taxes?
Well, I put that as, I think that's a major priority for the ag commissioner to talk about appraisal reform. And we have a population growth of the size of Houston every 10 years moving to Texas. We have to build schools, we have to fund the buses, we have to have a mechanism to fuel that. And so there has to be a vision for how are we going to fund our growth, and can you fund all this based on property tax. And farmers and ranchers pay property taxes, the homeowners pay property taxes. I was on the appraisal board, and we discovered that our chief appraiser used a squeal factor, and that means he raised your value till you squealed. And that's wrong. And the law said you would appraise every 3 years, but he was appraising every year but a different home in the neighborhood, and he would use that against the other homeowners that didn't protest. PVTO bill is 25 years old, it's antiquated. It was established to equalize all the property values across the various taxing entities. Now that all the property values are equalized, and you need to get back to the basics of saying, how can we save money? We're probably spending $250 million a year appraising property, and yet we're at 98% maximum value. Would any of you here spend $250 million looking for 2%? You know, you have a whole new technology in Google. You know, you could probably go contract with Google or Microsoft and say, hey, do a flyover every year and tell me how many square feet's been added to this house or this.
Sure.
And you could probably save, you know, $1 billion or $2 billion over 5 years. Would go right into the school budgets. And so we have to start focusing over what is the better way to fund public education and to fund infrastructure. And I had a bill that said we will roll the taxes, property taxes, back to about 20%. Then we would do away with the sales tax exemptions. And then we would have to go up 1 or 2%. But that's a consumption tax, and that's the fairest tax. Doesn't make any difference whether you're an illegal or not an illegal, you know, but if you're purchasing something, you're paying your fair share.
Right.
And so the property taxes is something that's always been important for a young person to own a home and pay for it. But you can't own a home and pay for it when they're raising the value based on your neighbor's ability to borrow.
That's correct.
Not based on cash.
That's correct.
So I had a bill that said we will use a consumer price index, we'll use some other kind of index, we'll do it regionally. You know, Montgomery County may be booming, and another area may not be, so set up regions like something similar to the water districts that there's a organization, and so that's what I mean for appraisal reform. You just don't need to keep spending $250 million a year out here with the same amount of workers and so they don't want to be laid off.
Sure.
So they're coming up with new ideas and new ways, and particularly on a farmer or rancher, they may say, hey, show us your feed bill, you know, or show me this. And it's just a mechanism to be able to say, wait a second, I'm going to do away with your ag exemption.
Right.
And I think people, you know, particularly now with all the farmers market, there's a lot of people buying this. My daughter buys from the farmers market. She gets the eggs from the farmers market and the lettuce. You may have a little garden out here that you may say, I'd like to have an ag exemption on. But that's what I mean by appraisal reform. There's so much money available if we bring it together and cut the cost of appraising and modernize it.
Hopefully I'll get a chance to follow up next time around. Dennis?
And of course, the tax on oil and gas rights is such that the state can simply take every penny of the value. That's the way it's written now.
Right.
I noticed that you mentioned conservation a number of times in here. And it seems like everything government does is exactly backwards. And in terms of conservation, the way it is right now, electricity costs less if you waste it. Water costs less if you waste it. If you try to conserve water, you pay a whole lot more per unit than the guy that leaves his hose running. So is that something the Commissioner of Agriculture can change?
Well, I think that goes back to your local control and the reason that the cost is because of the organization that's selling you the water.
Well, I think it's probably the state. Well, the state approves it for sure, right?
Well, no, I mean, your water rates are set by your
Mud or
city council.
city.
I spent about 2 years with the TCEQ as the sole complainant against $1 billion corporation. And they let them not only set it that way, but they also let them back charge all the residents for the cost of the litigation, which is another problem that's related to the legislature, so I won't ask that. But right now, the state mandates the technologies that really do penalize conservation. So that needs to be changed if we're gonna make any headway in that regard.
Right. I'm interested in listening. You know, anybody that has any good ideas about cutting costs, or better ways for conservation, or, you know, I'm available, and like to hear anyone's ideas on how we improve the state of Texas.
Well, Dennis wasn't claiming he has any good ideas.
No.
Right, I wasn't
Just I
gonna
see
say.
a lot of ideas that aren't good. I've got my own
We
share.
can recognize that happens. Ever since
That's interesting.
ethanol, the price of corn, and a lot of different things, you know, whether it be soy that they're using in biofuels or it's corn they're using, the price of the food that we eat
Mhm.
is going up.
Yeah,
Beef has gone up quite a bit
Yeah.
because corn is in shorter supply. And even with Monsanto stepping in and doing their bioengineering, it's still a problem. How safe do you think our foods really are from not only terrorism, you know, someone messing with the food supply, and with this bioengineering?
Well, first of all, I'm not an advocate of burning fuel in an automobile. The government subsidized ethanol, and nowadays, or today, looks like we're gonna drill ourselves out of a energy crisis. And I've been an advocate for the independent oil and gas producer all of my life, saying that if you give the incentives to oil and gas people, independents will look and find more energy. It may be expensive, but it looks like that we're gonna lower the price of oil, and we're gonna lower the price of gasoline. And I've advocated that. As it comes to the food sources, I believe that we ought to be growing food in an economical fashion. I believe that when you buy diesel for your tractor, that it should be at as lowest cost as you can, which converts to the lowest cost for the food. As far as the food safety, the Texas Department of Agriculture, I do not believe has a duty for food safety. And that's something, part of the coordination of trying to bring all that under one roof. I have gone through the Texas Tech laboratories several years ago that they were checking the lettuce for salmonella, but that's usually under a different grant. And I think that's a good question, but I believe that the Commissioner of Agriculture should be able to have all that in a control that the citizens have some form of accountability. And right now, you can call Ken Hance, the Chancellor of Texas Tech, and ask him, how's the food testing going out there, but he's not elected.
Yeah.
On the questionnaire, there was a question that says, why is the TDA administrating the Certified Retirement Community Program to attract retirees? And what in the Constitution requires this? And you did not answer that one. Could you go over that a little bit?
Well, first of all, all these small communities are trying to compete and not dry up. And so, you know, the Department of Agriculture's been given that task of working with those communities to do that. There's not anything in the Constitution that requires it. It's a task that the department has been offered, and they are responsible for administering a program.
How does that physically work?
I don't know how it physically works. I do know that there's a question about the Finance Authority. The Finance Authority, you want me to go to that one? It's kind of related.
Where the TDA makes loans or guarantees loans?
Well, they guarantee the loans. And they can make a loan from $250,000 to $750,000, or they guarantee it. That loan is generated at the local bank or at the institution, and they require collateral. And that is a $5 per farm tag fee that the farmers and ranchers have agreed to take that $5 fee. And there's about $20 million in that fund. And as a result of that, it's somewhat similar to the water financing. They use the interest off of the money that helps them guarantee a loan. But they're not making any loans directly. And I believe that they do work closely with the banks of saying we have this program available. And I would say that is a rollover to helping the small communities on economic development. Something similar to the water. They're too small and don't have the expertise to do that. And so the department tries to help that, as I understand it.
I want to give you a chance. There was something said in your questionnaire, and I believe there was some news reports about some arguments with a legislator. So since it's not just Tea Party people that look at this, but of course a lot will. So when you talk about being a compassionate conservative, of course we were first aware of that from President Bush, and then we were disappointed we got loaded down with new entitlement programs. We're all fine with being compassionate, but the problem is when the government and elected officials feel like they can be compassionate not with their own money, but with the taxpayers' money. So if you would, just explain what you mean and basically how you feel about, like the Tea Party movement, basically wanting the government to be taken back away from, special interests and lobbyists and elected officials back to the people.
Right. Well, I think a compassionate conservative is that I fit that mold very well. I work sometimes at Newgate Mission on Saturday mornings, and we feed over 250 people for breakfast.
So you mean individually, not like that's the government's job?
No, that's individually. That's
Okay.
a compassionate conservative. That's someone that goes down, puts in their time, and as a result of being a businessman, they would give you a list to go shop, and you'd be gone for 3 hours just buying 30 dozen eggs, and I said, wait a minute, let's get Cisco over here. And so we got Cisco, and now they have an account with Cisco. They sit in front of the computer, and Cisco delivers it. So a compassionate conservative is trying to help somebody else cut their costs, where the dollar from the community goes further. Now, with that being said, if one of those individuals falls out in the street with a stroke, a compassionate conservative says, let's call the ambulance, let's take him to the hospital, and you treat him. I don't think you leave somebody on the street to die.
Unless they're using Obamacare. You give them a pill.
Yeah, so to me, a compassionate conservative is someone that understands that there's people that are in need, and that there's certain things that our tax dollars go to. And as a taxpayer, I don't mind that my tax dollars, which to me is a blessing to make enough money to pay taxes, that part of my taxes are used for a compassionate conservative function. It's just that we have to control the cost of that. You don't want that to be out of control. That's where the physical conservative comes in. I don't want someone to stay in the hospital because they're getting 3 square meals. I
Right.
want them to take them down there, be examined, and put back to where they are. Which a lot of them are sleeping under bridges, or sleeping in bad homes, you know, and abandoned homes. But they come down for a hot meal on Saturday morning, and there's a devotional. I mean, there's people, every day, there's a devotional for that. And I think that we're doing the Lord's work by participating in it.
Of course, you do that in Houston, they'll write you a ticket now.
Put
They
you in
claim they're protecting the homeless by not allowing us to feed them.
jail. They don't want
It's
to feed them
just
our
weird.
It
It's
might
contaminated
make
food.
them sick.
Yeah, exactly. So better they go hungry, apparently.
You need our garbage cans.
Well, we've gone to, there's a garden. We put honeybees, you know, we have honeybee in the back, and they're doing their gardening, and, you know, it's just, but you have to have the people in the community willing to
Sure.
do that.
Sure, thank you.
Dale, last question.
Last question. Okay, well, I'll just follow up on my earlier question with respect to the reform of appraisals.
Yeah.
First of all, I guess I'm still trying to put together the pieces of what involvement the Ag Commissioner has with the appraisal reform. And second of all, kind of a adjunct question there of what are your thoughts about electing appraisal board members or whatever? It's not currently, it's an appointed, not an elected office.
Well, first of all, my point of how the Ag